Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. Duane the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in a clearing within a large and dense jungle, the scene overall a night setting, and I would be operating as my usual Kevin physical level form. The clearing had as though been acquisitioned for military purposes, as featuring would be all manner of temporarily constructed bunkers, a selection of large military-style planes, and innumerable individuals clad in army-type fatigues. On the real side, as shared by myself and other new friends over the years, anything of a military nature that features tends to indicate in some shape or fashion the continued process of awareness, but of course all according to context, as what may be occurring in our real side experiences, if it is of a military nature, may sometimes literally be as it appears. As a determination and a focus is required where the awareness process is concerned, this can best be represented through the use of military imagery, for operating as and within military units and missions does require the kind of discipline and focus that the awareness process and the continuation with it to its ultimate conclusion all is recognition demands. And oftentimes, not only may we find ourselves within military operations that seems to involve a progression of stages, each of which must be agreed with and involved in, as representative of the endless steps of the awareness process, but the guides themselves may be dressed in a military attire additionally, of a rank superseding our own, denoting their greater awareness. They may be admirals and captains, whereas our rank in relation to them may generally be that of a private. This would not detract from the reality that we all are equally free beings of real awareness light, but would indicate our standing in relation to the true reality we are a part of, the extent of our awareness, and indeed recognition, if at all, of the all is. As I said, all according to context, and we generally will receive real awareness afforded impressions that will allow determination that where we may be involved in military orientated activity, this is a visual means of expressing the awareness process in some way. There would be a real side experience as shared by a new friend relatively recently, where he would be approached by a military unit, invited to accompany them, and the next stage involving the boarding of a bus, which he would at that moment refuse, construed as steps in his continued respective awareness process. At that moment he wasn't ready for what would be the next step, though as Duane would mention in his response, acceptance and agreement with assuming the next stage in the process can be embraced at any moment, and our isness recognizing a journey rolls on. This real side experience would be a similar situation, though with a variation, that based within the military encampment that I was, the larger planes present were preparing to take to the skies, and as the representation goes then, necessary would it be to get aboard the planes and symbolically be transported to the next stage, awareness speaking. It's worth mentioning at this point that forests can represent the consciousness on the real side, the adage of being unable to see the wood, the overall of creation for the trees, the individual ideas within creation that we create, agree with, lock ourselves into, and limit ourselves accordingly, where we deny ourselves the full awareness oversight of everything creational. And in this case, that the military camp was within a clearing, we may construe this as indicative of being within overall creation, the forest, but that we are not locked into that which it comprises of, the clearing, perhaps representative of standing as the nowness of our real awareness selves, aside from the consciousness effecting creation, being within creation, but not of it, not embracing of its idea-based construct. As I mentioned, there was a variation in relation to the experience as shared by the other new friend, in that, although I was willing to proceed with my next step, as represented by boarding the plane, I was seemingly denied by the more highly ranked military personnel manning the temporary forest camp. There is the old saying of learning to walk before you can run, and it can be so that we may get somewhat ahead of ourselves, perhaps take on more than we can handle in regards to our awareness process. We may perhaps lack the necessary awareness to deal with that which we think we can take on and manage the karmic effect fallout such entails. Duane, as an example, must deal with the effect of taking on the entirety of a creation, such is the extent of his position and the responsibility such entails, as he faces every idea and body form of the simulator. Generally, we are afforded options and opportunity as we have the awareness to handle such. The greater the awareness, the greater the extent of our operation in regards to presenting the true reality. That as I was confronted here with the stark reality of my being denied a seat on one of the planes, the higher ranked military officers, very likely the real guides, or those of a greater awareness standing than myself, who disallowed my boarding, the initial sense would be that the next stage which the plane journey represented, I lacked awareness for, and ergo the ability to handle what such demanded. I would be reminded of a similar real-side experience I received years ago, a brief scene where I would recognize a group of new friends, but where they would proceed I would be unable to follow, for they would pass through a barrier or portal of a kind to a dimensional position beyond, and where a real guide would halt me and deny my access. It is indeed so that I have a long way to go with my awareness process, perhaps more than most. Nevertheless, I seldom place much by way of a personal self-created concern with the outcome. I just proceed with the journey and bumble my way toward the ultimate objective, that being eventual, all is recognition. In this case, however, I was not to be perturbed, and despite the guides denying my plane access, I would sneak onto a plane regardless. I would assume a seat, not being especially secretive, for surely there is nothing that the guides are unaware of. However, I would alter my external form, as if this would in some way hoodwink the all-knowing guides, that instead of my Kevin human form, I would become a bipedal, two-legged canine, although not a wolf, as is my general preference, but a fox, as a decided alternative. Despite my guise and the plane taking to the air with the others, my ruse didn't last long as expected, as my seat would be surrounded by a group of individuals that impressions revealed were beings of a greater awareness than myself, and very likely a guide or two among them. I would somewhat sink into my chair sheepishly as they went through the theatrics of determining my credentials and my permissions to be aboard, concluding that I was not on the plane's boarding list. They would inquire as to my true identity and form, but I would rather fold my arms truculently and adopt a very uncooperative stance, refusing to utter a word in response. Very easy could it be for the guides simply to oust me from the plane. Naturally, they knew who I was, as they have the awareness standing to determine every idea behind the simulated fronts, the external altered body forms we may present, but it was as though they were rather humouring me. Duane has shared a real-side experience where so adamant was he to proceed with his objectives, he would demand of the guides blocking his path on a beach to move out of his way, that although it seemed the guides were standing in defiance of his choices, in reality they wanted to determine that he indeed did have the drive and determination for the task. They would part and allow him access, and indeed be congratulatory as to his steadfast resolve. This real-side experience may have echoes of the same notion, that of the guides appearing to be preventing or advising that I do not proceed with whatever step was represented by the plane journey, and yet I would do so regardless, sneaking onto the plane, adopting an altered external fox form, and formulating the unrealistic consideration that the real guides would be unrealizing of their stowaway. The planes would touch down and deliver all that were aboard them into what appeared to be an arena of sorts, enclosed within a steel fence. At this stage, evidently I hadn't been turned away, and would proceed with the other plane occupants toward the arena, for want of a better reference. On the real side, we may delve into positions of life we perhaps hadn't operated in before, that although we all are this everything is this reality through the real awareness that is a part of it, our standing in relation to what is effectively ourselves, the all is according to our extent of awareness. And as we may find ourselves in what impressions reveal as a greater, literally speaking, positioning, so we may find our relatable references are lacking by which we can make a sense of what we are experiencing, if indeed it is even visually presented as a simulation and not simply impressions, as can be the case. That if I encounter something that is beyond my current lifetime of references by which to compare it by, if it is presented as a simulated, it will amalgamate into something that will make sense according to my current personal self, but may not necessarily be a perfect expression of what it actually is. I am reminded of a book by Stephen King, From a Buick 8, where a portal was so far removed visually from any reference present in human consciousness, that to lay eyes upon it, so would the mind formulate it into something that made sense according to the personal self, in the case of the book A Buick 8, and the narrative would go on to proclaim that the portal had to appear as a something for all those that beheld it. This scene here was a similar situation, presented as a simulation, but reconfigured into something that made visual sense to the personal self, a kind of a fenced arena, but wasn't as it actually was. Regardless, it seemed the objective was for the plane-based awareness becoming individuals and myself to engage in a particular way that was equally as difficult to personal self-describe. But the overall impression of it was that of necessity, where the awareness process was concerned, as though we were in some way affording a certain brand of mutual support in a more being-to-being real awareness capacity, and which visually translated in such a confusing way that I can only describe it as engaging rather a generic reference within the confines of this metallic fenced-off arena, though, as I said, this wasn't what it actually was. And indeed, despite my awareness perhaps being lacking for this next stage, and maybe that I struggled to recognize exactly what was transpiring would reflect this awareness inadequacy, impressions would reveal that I would assume the prominent position with what was taking place here, as though taking charge of it, and perhaps a greater clarity will become so in time for my personal self, for as it was, I couldn't quite get my hands around it to convey it literally as I would have desired, only that it was a significant step as impressions revealed, and perhaps my explanation of it fails to afford it justice. And indeed, were it not for my assumption of my two-legged fox form, I may not have remembered the experience at all. Very possibly then, the outer form I assumed wasn't just for the purposes of attempting to conceal my identity, but that the experience be more likely to stick in the memory on awaking, as all exaggerated features tend to serve the purposes of. In an unrelated scene that followed, I would find myself in a very high-tech complex, restored once again as my standard physical-level human form, and it seemed I was involving myself in some scientific operation or other. There would be others present, and we all would be undergoing a procedure as orchestrated by a human in appearance a female, sporting a traditional laboratory long white coat, etc. Impressions would reveal there would be nothing sinister, untoward, or malintended in regards to what was transpiring. The female was not in any way dark force affiliated or associated, though she was an individual personal self-consciousness immersed, but endowed with a highly developed capability where technology and its application was concerned. It was as though the group and myself had acquired her services, that certain adjustments could be made to our simulated forms in such a way that would prove beneficial where our galactic projects are concerned. I have experienced such before on the real side, everything from consciousness adjusting to exact alteration of effected form to being taken through technological procedures for the same purposes, that we are in some way enhanced other dimensionally, or indeed potentially physical level body-wise also, as everything we agree and are subjected to on the real side will have a bearing and impact on our physical level and physical vehicles, be it adversely, or as seemed to be the situation in this scene, beneficially. For in reality, as it is the ideas of consciousness that effect body-form design, to change the ideas so the forms are altered in accordance. Some beings have the ability to alter the ideas of consciousness of themselves and agreeable others at will. Other individuals can apply the same idea alteration, though through a technological means. This the group and myself were agreeable to being subjected to, and I would be led through a series of individual procedures, each of which was somewhat beyond my personal self's ability to describe. Such was the level of technological sophistication being applied. But it was the final station that stuck more readily in my mind on waking, as it involved the drawing of some of my blood, and a kind of genetic splicing procedure with some other material. As I said, overall it was an agreed-to situation that through the technological expertise of the female scientist, so alterations were applied to our body forms that in some way would be essential for certain of our assignments we are intending to involve ourselves with on the real side, and maybe even the physical, if such adjustments to the body forms become physical level manifest. As I mentioned, everything filters through to the physical in some reflected shape or fashion, and there the experience would end, and I would attempt to piece it all together and make as understandable an accounting as possible.
When Kevin on the plane was confronted in his fox body, what happened after that, or did the scene change? In other words, he was confronted, and what did he do? Was he still there, or the scene changed?
They humored him. They obviously knew who he really was. They humored him and said some things, but they let him stay on the plane, and he actually landed in that fenced-off area.
Mm-hmm.
So he stayed on the plane.
Yeah, well, he described himself as crossing his arms.
Right, like I'm not gonna move. Like, no.
Yeah, right. In other words, yeah, it's a block. It's body language. So that's good. In other words, yes, they wanted to see that no matter what. So in other words, they would have to drag him off the plane. Okay. And so they're not going to do that. They want to see what his position is, which is it's adamant, you see. Now, you had a situation, this is a little different, but it's kind of funny. It's like a Seinfeld episode where you didn't quite quite wear the mask all the way, and they wanted you to get off the plane, right?
Right.
Yeah, years ago when you were flying back and forth, and then was it Alaska Airlines or whatever, they kicked you off the plane so you couldn't get back on the plane.
Well, they had us wear our mask over our nose and mouth, but I would only wear it over my mouth, and that seemed to bother them, that my nose was exposed.
Right. Okay. So we got that part, but the idea is that they didn't like that, so they took you off the plane because from their point of view, I'm just guessing now that they probably thought you were too nosy. So they took you off the
Right.
plane, okay? And they didn't want your nose in their business or anywhere else. So again, they took you off the plane and they disallowed you to fly on the airlines. Isn't that right?
That's right. I was escorted off the plane by 2 security agents and not allowed to fly for about a year.
Yeah. Okay. But it's okay. See, it's okay. What I'm saying is that's not the same, but it's a funny little story that goes with all this, and that is that yeah, that's a different scenario there. So if you would have resisted, is what I'm saying, they would have handcuffed you, put you in a body bag or whatever, and got you off the plane because that's a physical situation. It's a little bit different. And so you have to be ready to be creative, or for the moment, just like the hero in the movie, he kind of gives up for the moment to be captured, actually, and then does his escape, you see. So again, I just thought I'd bring that in as a little funny, but what Kevin did, yes, was excellent because he also showed creativity with his initiative to stay there because he wants to see, he wants to penetrate the unknown. Or most people, they just want to stay with what they know. And so I see this all the time with people. They gain the knowledge, and we've seen many people come and go because they just take the knowledge, but that's as far as they want to go. They don't want to see what's real. And so again, this is recognition. It is not about what you think you know. It's about what you don't know. It's always about what you don't know and how to recognize as it shows up. This is the best part. So this is where the invisible seeing and being comes in. And so Mr. Kevin there is the hero. Yeah. So again, he's on his journey and he really wants to recognize this and going through, the mental mechanics of things. Each person has that challenge. We all have that challenge. We at first need this, just like when we're young. We were raised by our parents. We wore diapers. They changed our diapers. And at a certain point, we had to learn not to go potty in our pants at some point. Some take longer than others. Sometimes we would potty in while we were sleeping because we'd have a dream where we got to go to the bathroom, the body does, but we don't recognize that it's the body and we got to get up and take care of the situation, as one example. And then there's the bigger challenge as we grow older, and we have to, for most people, have to go through the schooling systems and be indoctrinated to be really, you might say really stupid and unaware. Then we have the challenge of we have to start to support ourselves even though we weren't taught that. The indigenous people taught their children how to survive. The system doesn't, because they don't want you to survive. They want you to be duh and flounder around, and they want to watch you. That's their entertainment, being stupid and creating a lot of nonsense like everybody else, etc. I taught my daughter, the daughter at the time, up till age 12, until she decided different, to be self-sufficient. I focused on her intuitive awareness and not on anything academic, because I knew that would come about in her own way anyhow. And most parents, they do the opposite. They bring to their children what they went through, thinking that it's something kind of special to be indoctrinated and then go out and find a job, go out and get a career, whatever. Yeah, well, you can do that. You deal with it. That's how the world is. Yes, you deal with it, but at the same time, you can be more aware. And so this is what's really cool about Kevin's experiences, because there's an adventure here that's available for people to start to learn and recognize with, because he becomes the objective view from what I'm presenting and others are presenting, etc. That's very valuable, but who can see it? And so life is big. All of a sudden, it got a lot bigger. So you and I and others, Ava and whatever, and many others came from what Paul created. And that's fine. It was all fine. But we had to learn to emerge. We had to learn to walk through that and to see more. And so again, better defining references, but everything is references only until you get to this seeing and being and the reality of it, etc. And it's invisible. But anyhow, Kevin's experiences are wonderfully unique.